can get things started. And let me just introduce myself. My name is John Johnson Jr., Assistant Professor of History at St. Peter's University. And I am interviewing Michelle Pérez, class of 2016,
Yes.
St. Peter's University. And could you do me a favor and spell your name out and spell it out slowly?
Sure. Michelle, Michelle, and Perez, Perez. There's an accent on the first E in Perez.
Okay, thank you. And today's date is March 17th, 2022, St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Happy St. Patty's Day.
And today we'll we're meeting today to conduct an interview for the 150th anniversary Oral History Project. And so thank you for taking some time to spend with us today. Could you just tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up, where you grew up, and those kinds of things before coming to St. Peter's?
Sure. So I was actually born in Jersey City. I was born at the Margaret Haig when the Jersey City Medical Center was at the Beacon, now Beacon, the condominiums, about 2 blocks or 3 blocks from St. Peter's. My mom was recently telling me about her daily or monthly routine of taking the bus from Union City, where I actually grew up, to Journal Square, and then walking from Journal Square all the way to the Jersey City Medical Center. So Jersey City, Union City has been home here in the United States my whole life. Union City is the border city next to Jersey City, up further north in Hudson County. And I'm the child of 2 Colombian immigrants from Cartagena, Colombia, the Caribbean, Afro-Indigenous Caribbean coast. First generation.
Could you tell me a little bit about what life was like in Union City in your community?
Sure. So as mentioned, my parents were Colombian, but it felt daily at school, weekends, as if I was in the middle of Central or South America, because that's just what Union City was. Various diasporic groups from all of these, countries and islands. And it was pretty neat to be able to learn different foods, different cultures before I went to Jersey City to St. Peter's, which had its own unique vastness, right? So I'd argue that I got to experience other continents, if you will, culturally, once I got to Jersey City. So the stark diversity difference wasn't as apparent, as rather familiar. And they were right next to each other, right? And so, everything from food to music, it's why I studied what I did, or what I've wanted to do my whole life, in international relations, diplomacy, my master's. Yeah.
Okay. And so could you tell me what high school you went to? Did you go to Union City High?
High school, yeah. So ironically, kind of my freshman year, I was technically at Union Hill because I lived in Uptown Union City. At the time, Union Hill, this was 2008, 2009, Union Hill and Emerson had been the 2 high schools in Union City, Emerson being for downtown residents of Union City. That my first year in high school, they merged the 2. They finally ended up building the Union City High School. They put the former Roosevelt Stadium on the roof of the high school, and merged 2 very different populations of students in one high school, which was pretty neat to see how each student, all of us, identified, right?
What differentiated the populations, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the stark contrasts was the North or Union Hill students were the considered nerdy musicians, classical musicians, right? That group. And I'm sure that they existed at Emerson too, but Emerson was, when we came to the high school, very clearly the school spirited, the more social or outgoing folks. They were just 2 different worlds that came together. There was a different culture at Emerson for pep rallies and things like that I didn't really experience at Union Hill. I think we had the intellectuals, as some of them would call themselves too. So it was a funny, hard adjustment, because even as first year students, my peers were kind of like, how do we mold, right? But we saw the melting by senior year as the first graduating class of the new Union City High School. But it was quite the growth.
Mm-hmm.
It required a lot of growth to see past some of those differences.
Okay. What made Union Hill such a different, or what added to the culture of Union Hill, or what shaped the culture of that school versus Emerson? Like, why was it viewed as the intellectual school versus, how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I, I'm not sure. I know maybe it was a generational thing, or like who our teachers were,
Mm-hmm.
and that shaped it. Like even today, like there are still some of the Emerson high school teachers who still are very much centering that, like the student life, right? The student life of a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just remember, and may he rest in peace, an English teacher who taught me the word thespian as an eighth grader. So he sent us a letter, and he was the teacher at the high school at Union Hill. And in the letter, he's like, "Welcome, future thespians," and he's welcoming us into high school, and all of my peers know what this is too. So I just I I was even inspired to audition for a play then. This is why I did Argus Eyes, but I only ended up doing Argus Eyes like the concession stand. I never had the courage to really get on the stage and act. But we were always philosophizing and having really intense conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to knock Emerson. I want to acknowledge that I don't know Emerson deeply. I just know what the peers, that the people I became close to senior year for prom and all that, and becoming student leader even in high school, they were from the Emerson crowd. They were from the school spirit crowd, centering that experience too.
Okay.
Mm.
And I guess one last question around I guess your pre-St. Peter's days. Could you tell me something about your parents and your family and what impact that had on your early childhood?
Sure. So my grandfather, and my step grandmother. So not my mother, not my father's mother. She and he migrated here on a lottery. My grandfather worked at the airport and ended up getting like a free trip to come to the United States to visit for the first time.
Mm.
And this occurs when my father is born in 1968. And so my grandfather lived here in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, undocumented. So my dad didn't meet his dad until he was 18 and was arriving in the United States for the first time. So literally, it's just my grandfather who migrates, my father who migrates. My father returns, marries my mom, who he met in church, growing up. They were Catholic. My dad was an altar server. My mom was a catechist. I ended up doing all these things: reader, lector, if you will.
Mm.
And married her at, ironically, another Jesuit. This was one of the cathedrals, St. Peter Claver, the Jesuit patron saint of slaves in Cartagena.
Mm.
And he and they return and they migrate to the U.S. to Union City. So having all of that, I have found inspiration in their migration story, their immigration story. My grandfather's undocumented status for almost 18 years, and his experiences versus what we see now in present day.
Mm-hmm.
It's dictated, a lot of the research I did at St. Peter's, the first generation experience, the cultural knowledge, my mother's like withholding or even resistance of assimilating. That's why I know I can read and write Spanish fluently. I very much grew up Colombian, and it was very easy to become a Colombian citizen at 18 and vote now, and now have a Colombian passport, right? It's their identity and the parts of them they brought with them here have shaped who I am deeply. And hopefully will someday either become an immigration attorney or a PhD in migration studies. Who knows? But I'm fascinated by like global immigration, refugees, asylum seekers. Like it shapes everything about your identity to know how that pattern begins and where it ends, because I don't ever really think it ends, if you will, right?
Mm.
I think it's limited, but it's not. It doesn't end.
Of course, of course. So what then brought you to St. Peter's?
Yeah, so it was an accident. It was sheer accidents. I mean, honestly, I was a senior at in high school, and I was like, okay, Fordham. I didn't know college, right? Like I wasn't, and I knew the Ivies, and I had only applied to 2. I had technically applied to 14 schools, and only Penn State had said yes. So I got into University of Park. I was there a week, and then several different things happened where the cards were not in my favor. And Dr. Miss McCarr, class of 69, I believe, at St. Peter's, called Dr. Bender, and Dr. Virginia Bender took the time to sit with me and interview me. And I enrolled at St. Peter's in a day. I was really trying to go away. Like, I had a school application in Hawaii. I was like, I've known this area my whole life, but St. Peter, that's where I was supposed to be, a block away from where I was born. And it's been one of those things where I've stayed in New Jersey until hopefully my foreign service career would begin, and then I get to visit the rest of the world. But the beauty was that St. Peter's exposed me to the rest of the world without even needing to, right? I got to see Mexico because of Dr. Suri, bunch of different states. Like, I would have never gone to New Mexico on my own, right? And so research opportunities did that for me. Baltimore, it was just yeah, neat. It's really neat.
Wow. And so you were in Pennsylvania on
for
campus.
a week. I moved in. I had settled. I have a whole picture of my room, my dorm room. The floor is full. Like, this first year class is packed with students, so packed that I'm dorming with the RA on the floor, who's now a doctor. Yeah. A doctor.
Oh, you kept in contact. That's
yeah,
cool.
she was awesome. Yeah. I mean, and it was my first exposure. And there's like a small cohort. I was in the science floor. And there are some students, like, and 3 of the students on that floor that I befriended at Penn State that semester became doctors, veterinarians. They were all in the sciences. So, but 1 week, and then I was back. And I should have known when we were driving there and the car broke down, that this was not it. And I didn't look back. I fully immersed myself at St. Peter's.
Wow. And so, did you live on campus when you came to St. Peter's?
Yeah, the first semester. So I don't know if you remember, but that first semester of 2012 was Sandy. So I had built a strong bond with a great chunk of folks, students, some of which are no longer students, but I still keep in contact with them. They're like New York, California. And we survived Sandy. Thank you, Fordham, for your delicious, treats and stuff that you were sending the stranded Virgin Island students at St. Peter's that semester, because we were struggling. We were playing Monopoly and Candlelight, Manhunt, Midnight. It was intense. I didn't want to leave campus, and I was literally like 10 minutes away in Union City. That's how much fun I was having in the middle of a crisis.
Well, the whole East Coast is out of power, and you just having fun on campus. How about that?
Yeah. And so many of us were too.
No shame.
Oh,
no
God,
shame.
it was so much trouble. Yeah, that's why I know Sandy became one of those like pinnacle moments. And meanwhile, I just have a lot of laughter when it comes to that one.
That's great. You had mentioned before that you majored in international relations.
So my master's was in diplomacy and international relations, but while I was a student at St. Peter's didn't have the major. It's political science that I majored in, and then I had minors in anthropology and philosophy. And technically, that's the IR concoction, is a little bit of all of that.
Why those majors? Like, why that combination?
Well, I knew political science because I would at least tap into international relations. And so I was 18, and I've learned a lot of my naivety around these things, because the reality is much bigger than what 18-year-old Michelle thought of these things. But I remember being 18 in high school, and I was a peer mentor for peer group connection, PGC, and we were doing this like icebreaker, and it was called the human knot. And I don't know what was going on with my brain chemistry that day, but I had an epiphany of sorts, right? I was like, you know, leadership takes a combination of stepping in and being able to see, and then stepping on and letting others see, and also decide.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was like, well, where or what institution does that, right? Where can I see that happen in real time? And that's where I realized I wanted to be Secretary General of the UN. I don't necessarily know what I want to do now. The global or multilateral organizing is more my cup of tea, but it was a very clear direction point. And so that's why the political science was just like a natural next step if IR wasn't the major. But I knew I was missing something, and I had loved philosophy from high school because, again, learned it in middle school. And so I knew I was going to introduce that at some point, but then there was like the actual human cultural, like the basics, like what affects humans' ability to think, or how they think, and they think within the confines or understandings of their cultures. And so that's how the first cultural anthropology class, I literally declared the minor that day. So those two classes kind of provided a healthier balance for a lot of the politics, which I've learned I'm not. It's great to know, but I'm not a politician. So like, I needed that balance, right?
Okay. And so I guess coming in, you were, I guess, clear on establishing yourself as a citizen of the world, a person that was engaged in the world and shaping what happens in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't see things narrowly. It always was big picture.
Okay. Was there a professor here at St. Peter's that left an indelible impression on you?
I have several.
Sure.
Yeah, so and honestly within each major, right? So with political science, it's without a doubt Dr. Anna Brown. Within anthropology, I got to know several professors. So Dr. Surrey, Dr. McLaughlin, actually the entire sociology department. Because I got to do research and conversations with Dr. Trio. At some point I wanted to do child psychology. The sixth grade me who wanted to be a pediatric neurologist thought of being a teacher, right? And I still nannied, 10 years of nannying. So I got to meet Dr. Ayala. So Dr. Ayala is also instrumental. Then you have Professor Savek, and believe it or not, Dr. O'Neill, who I disagree with intellectually all the time. I am not an Ayn Rand person, but I respect her thinking and how she helped shape my thinking so much. And there's like literally the entire school. Every history professor, yeah, it's been amazing.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Could you tell me a few of the, well, I guess aside from working in concessions for Argus Eyes, were there other extracurricular things that you did while on campus?
What didn't I do? Yeah, so the one that left the most, the most imprint in all of my time there was being president of the Student Government Association. Being, the voice of the students and all the small wins that we managed. Everything from those gender neutral signs you see everywhere on the bathrooms to like being SAT consideration and not based, right? The conversations I was able to engage in as a senior in college with the board of trustees, seeing actual diplomacy in action, as minute and as maybe not as I'll never forget how valued I felt from having folks who are in leadership positions recognize the impact, right? Sorry, my friends.
I can pause if you need me to.
Is that okay? I just
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay.
Student government president.
Um, I guess it is just as a follow up to that question. Then, could you tell me about a friendship that took root at St. Peter's?
Yes, several. I'm actually staying with two friends that I met during the Sandy Marathon. Currently, who live in Jersey City, have become graphic designers, best friends.
Mhm,
I had three triads of best friends in different aspects of my life.
mhm,
So I had one from the Sandy group. Sandy group. It sounds like a consulting
mhm,
firm from the Sandy Ordeal Marathon. I had another that came from campus ministry. Sadly, we lost our third member of the triad from that friendship.
mhm,
But still, like deep root, fraternity out of that, right?
mhm,
People I would just hang out with every single day. And then the third triad is Danny and Denise, who are also my forever best friends, who I met through Scola, the choir that opened up or began in 2014, 2015, of which I still sing with at least one semester,
Oh wow.
one concert a year. They had
Mhm,
two and several throughout the year, but
mhm,
I have met lifelong friends in general at St. Peter's, and I think it's because of all of those either extracurriculars or all those elements of our time there that were available to us as opportunities
mhm.
to grow that we then grew together, and we've grown out of St. Peter's, but together with at the same time. So
Okay. I'm sorry. Can I pause real quick for something?
of course,
Let's continue on. So you mentioned before that I guess your parents, when they were in Colombia, they attended a Jesuit church when they were there. Uh,
yeah, they were married at St. Peter Claver,
mhm,
a Jesuit priest.
mhm,
Um, He was the patron saint of enslaved persons in
mhm,
Cartagena. Cartagena has a history of, that has connections to the transatlantic slave trade,
mhm,
John Hawkins, the spread of enslavement throughout South America from the north,
mhm,
because as you know, Colombia is like at the tippy top north of the left side of the continent.
mhm,
Um, and there's just a presence of the Jesuits there, as well as the Augustinian Recollects. So, fun fact: before I met
mhm,
the Jesuits or knew of any other order, I had done my baptism, first communion, willing. I say that intentionally. Confirmation, confirming myself to Catholicism for the rest of my life at an
mhm,
Augustinian church, St. Augustine's Church in Union City,
mhm,
and Saint Saint. He was a saint to this parish, but Peter, his name was
mhm.
Father Peter, Padre Pedro, recently died. Uh,
Mhm.
so it's the name just follows me everywhere. The
Oh.
Jesuits now do too.
Indeed, indeed. Could you tell me how the Jesuits have impacted both your early life, but also your time at St. Peter's? How has Jesuit education, what impact has that had on your growth?
Well, to start difference, the Augustinian Recollects and the Jesuits. Um, so I don't even know where to start. It's like they kind of happen congruently, right? So imagine just taking with you everything you've learned about Catholicism into college and then completely unlearning it or learning it entirely different. Um, because the way you were learning it didn't necessarily account for the humanistic component of just existing, not just being a religious or I'm not in an order, but I mean like being a religious person and then being among people or knowing people, really knowing that some things are meant to be unlearned or known. I think Dorothy Day is just like the greatest example of this. And I mean, it's not it's not an accident necessarily, right, that the Jesuit universities seem to be with the people, in communion with people, right? Impoverished communities specifically. I think their intention, even though it doesn't always happen because of privilege and other things that institutions inherently create, like consequence. The idea is to, and Pope Francis, another, the Jesuit Pope, the first Latin American Jesuit Pope, has said this: to encounter people, right? To encounter those you wouldn't otherwise, for X number of reasons, right? And so that was the difference. Whereas I had the philosophy of Saint Augustine for one half of my life, the philosophy of how humanity should be and the things you should learn and what you could be doing and living in this very astral could and should be, right? Being a Jesuit educated taught me to actually be, not just think. There's a big difference for me there. And how to be too, right? Not from a place of hierarchy, but among. And that was very, very real, and it became very real once the pandemic began, because it was almost, without a doubt, now I'm like now exposed, and I'm like, I know that the pandemic was here before it became a pandemic. It's always been here. All the systemic issues that we've seen have always been around. They've just been exacerbated, right? So to be with the people just became second nature. It was like, what am I doing? Necessarily isolating within the guidelines. It's like, no, this is when mutual aid is absolutely an imperative. And there was, as safely as I could, I mean, I did end up getting COVID, and that's my fault, but there was no question about it at that time, right?
Could you give me more, I guess, a specific example of how an experience at St. Peter's helped you unlearn your former, I guess, walk through Christianity and Catholicism into a space of being engaged, and I guess kind of exemplifying some of the ideals of, men and women for others, women and men for others.
Yeah, and without making the buzzwords, right? What happened was, it was very easy for me to say pro life in theory as part of this faith. This is pre St. Peter's. Why question that, right? There was no question of this. But all of that came from a headspace, not from like a human space, right? It came from, and I don't have a direct understanding of this yet, but I can just say this, and this is true, and it can be true. And what I've unlearned is that that's not the case. There are real life circumstances that disenfranchise or disproportionately affect very real people, very specifically BIPOC people, that I can't therefore lump everyone into the same expectation just because of the definitions of my faith, right? Or because of the confines of my faith. And I say that example because it's the hardest one to unlearn, right? Because with it comes all of this like politics and all of this like limitation of control, right? And of other things that are happening too. And it's no longer easy for me to lump that assumption or set that expectation. And then the other beautiful part is that I learned other faiths at St. Peter's. I didn't just learn Catholicism or unlearn Catholicism from its confines. That these stipulations don't exist in other faiths. There's nothing in the Quran that says this is the way it must be in every single scenario. And in fact, in I believe it's Judaism, it's critical that the woman's life be a priority. And that's particularly, as we started with this mentioning Jersey City Medical Center, like my mom had preeclampsia, it was either her or me, and my dad didn't choose either one of us.
Mhm.
He said, doctor, pick both. I picked both. Save them both for my birth. So there's a lot. I mean, and then this goes into like child mortality rates for Black and Indigenous women in this country, right? So like there's just, and then that's the other piece of like being Jesuit educated. It's like you don't just learn, this is the term, right? Sociological imagination. Whatever affects one person isn't just that person's fault. It's part of a larger systemic issue that isn't individual and should, homeless and houselessness, right? Another one. Blaming it on the person. And like Catholicism teaches you charity, but in reality, what we learned was mutual aid. Not only is this individual houseless person's problem or issue not their fault, not because of laziness, all the other reasons capitalism tells us is the reason. It's because of the systemic institutions that exist, the systemic problems that have occurred, patterns that we've built, behavior we've allowed. And so all of that is tied to that.
I guess along those lines, could you talk through, I guess, a particular issue, and you mentioned a few there, that was salient for you at your time while you were at St. Peter's? Some political issue, social issue, something that, if we look in the newspaper, we can read an article about what was going on, but, what did Michelle view? What did Michelle see at that time?
I wasn't paying attention to the vast murder of Black men until 2014. Yeah, that was the first time that I was ever. Yeah, that question is hard because yeah, it's hard to talk about.
Take your time. Well, we can move on. Which,
Philando Castile was probably the hardest one for me. Everyone has their hard one, like the one that they and I just found myself trying to organize on campus. First time, but it being exceptionally hard because no one was paying attention, or few were paying attention besides the usual suspects, right? And to the degree that was a distraction situation, right? Like we're all distracted as college students. I don't want to completely blame an entire community of people for not paying attention, but it was isolating. Even though I knew Black action community, that community, and the social justice community or clubs, of which I love Angelique. She was president of it during this time, was actively organizing us all. It felt really isolating. It was like the first time I was being exposed. Woke, another buzzword that has since lost its meaning. And I think in so many ways I was radical without knowing the words. I was a revolutionary without knowing the words to describe it, because it just felt so innate, right? Like this needs to end. This needs to be abolished. This system of of all of them, the ways in which they're all interconnected, both police, state violence on Black people, the incarceration in general, what have you, right? And while all of, for example, the Black men in my life family are in Colombia and I don't see their day-to-day experiences, I started to like the degree of empathy was just, it was consuming. And there were other moments where I didn't know what to do, right? So it was just continuing to educate myself. I think at that time I was also not ready to actively organize outside of like the safety of my school, which I have come to realize it's an entirely different thing when you kind of have the protection of your professors, of which thankfully at St. Peter's we had a lot. We still have a lot of very radical revolutionary professors, or maybe just a couple few. But they seem like a lot in this world where there are very few people in general that I meet. Yeah, so that, I mean, and then yeah, all of the other things were things that we were learning about how to deal with in classes, but the stuff that was happening in the world, and mind you, my graduation was just before 45, before term right begins, right? So I'm in the real world at the beginning of this period. So it just seems like one giant hamster wheel since then, right?
And I hate to make it like cliche or anything like that, but do you think that period of time, 2014, 2015, and kind of the things that we were bombarded with fairly regularly in terms of things that were happening across the country to people of color, how do you think that helped you negotiate 2016 through the present? Even if you weren't necessarily engaged or active, rather, in terms of community organizing and trying to create systems of support for people, but also ways of kind of deconstructing these things. How do you think that period of time, I guess in a way, prepared you to be able to endure the last 5 years?
I developed a really deep sense of anger to erasure and silencing. And it was through that, and I've had many conversations about this because my honors thesis at St. Peter's was bringing witness to the murder of Berta Cáceres, an indigenous human rights, civil rights, defender in Honduras, Balenca people, against the building of a dam on their precious river, right? She was murdered that March, this month, would have been her birthday too, that 2016. So my last semester at St. Peter's. So I changed my thesis like twice before that. And I could barely get through that presentation either. Thesis defense. But the anger of her voice being silenced, the anger of Black men's voices being silenced, the erasure of indigenous perspectives. At this time, I don't know if you remember, Pope Francis was also talking about like care for our planet. He had come out with this encyclical on what we should be doing as a world to care about our planet, our home. And the erasure of our planet was, finally, I mean, people are still denying climate change, but they were very much denying climate change 13, 14, 15, 16. Like it was in the news. I just had hypervigilance of world news at the time. It was also really bad for my mental health, right? But thankfully I knew COVID happened like 2 months before we saw COVID. So thanks Reuters or whatever. So just being cognizant of the pattern of silencing and erasure. I knew what was up. I knew it was up, and that's how I got through the last fight. I've known what is up. And I've since realized that I could try to protect myself all I want from getting silenced or erased. Or my people, our people in general. But we have a bigger fight than we can imagine ahead of us, right? And knowing, and that the sliver of hope there of its outcome is what keeps me sane almost daily. That and Afro beats. I mean, I can't survive without Burna Boy every day. I really can't.
The beat of the drum.
Beat of the drum, exact. My own drum, but then his drums. His drum isn't really good. Their drums are amazing. That's what it is. Yeah.
Thank you for being honest and frank about that time and how you felt that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Interesting pivot of sorts, but could you tell me why St. Peter's University is an important institution of higher learning, just based on your particular experience, not the the scripted kind of thing, but just based on
what I lived,
what you lived. Yeah.
I had support. I got support. I did not have that in applying to schools. My parents, right? They tell you, they're like, the only way out of poverty is going to college, but they don't know how to go to college. They don't know what it's like to send an application. I had to do that all on my own. I had to figure out what a FAFSA was. And when you grow up translating tax documents for your parents and like bills and like other things your whole life since like middle school, every single parents' night, yeah, mom, I'm doing great. The teacher's just saying I talk a lot, like in Spanish, right? I'm a talker. You get into this space and you're like, well, now I'm in. How do I finish? And where easily I could have given up because I didn't think I could finish. It was so clear I was going to finish from the beginning because I had support. People willing to support me, people willing to meet me and then support me. And now what I've seen is an evolution of the entire institution hoping to support more students like me. And that's still really rare at schools. All institutions have been built on the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved persons, but not all of them support their generations, right? So that's why I think it's important, because it sees the value of someone who didn't have thousands of dollars to be properly trained for like an SAT, because I can't pay for St. Peter's out of pocket, because my parents couldn't pay for St. Peter's out of pocket. They couldn't even co-sign. They couldn't even co-sign a loan. And that experience and so many other, with so many more or different challenges, are just unique, but not unique in the student population already or historically. And St. Peter's has been there for them. My objective now as president of the alumni board is to see that post their time at St. Peter's, the support continues. I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but we're going to get there.
That's beautiful. Could you give me a sense of what your vision is? And I'm curious about that because I think historically recent grads of color, there doesn't necessarily be, and this is kind of broadly speaking, not just St. Peter's, with the exception of like smaller groups, there doesn't necessarily seem to be broad alumni involvement in historically predominantly white institutions, right? Of course, St. Peter's is going through its changes. And so
Yeah.
could you give us a sense of what that vision is in terms of increasing alumni involvement for recent graduates?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the word generation is part of our sesquicentennial conversation because I've thrown it around several times in the last couple of years, because it's like super, super important to me, I think, and imperative that we recognize that the generations that existed historically have been alumni of the university were white, were white men. We know this. It was a white men institution at some point too. But that the generations that will continue to represent St. Peter's moving forward will not be just that. And they finally recognize this. There's like at the boards level, there's an interdisciplinary approach right now where I, as president of the alumni board, the one of the three boards, trustees and regents included, that actually represents students or former students, now alumni, aka the vast majority of the people that walk the stage, have been invited to engage with the trustees, have been invited to engage with leadership. That recognition is important. We're not the alum giving the vast number of donations, but we're representing the voice. And for me to be president and have Bob Andrews be vice president, this is a white man, also an alum, fellow choir chorale member, who I met during the singing concerts and things like that of that nature. Stepping aside and being mindful, intentional, stepping aside from leadership in this position to acknowledge this generational change. It's a slower but faster process than I had anticipated. I didn't see myself in this role yet, and I'm honored that it's happening at the crux of like the next 150 years. Engagement generally means, I think, knowing this generation, and if leadership doesn't know this generation of alums or isn't consistently exposed or having these conversations with this generation of alum, then the vision will fall flat, whatever the vision becomes, right? And we're still, Bob and I continuously have conversations like, we need to be hearing from more alums. We do. We can't be deciding for them, right? The same way in a community, we need a needs assessment. We have to be listening to what alums' needs are right now. And so in many ways, I keep hearing support. It's like COVID, may have had them a job post-COVID, may not be the case now. How do we mitigate that?
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think, you made the important point as we mark this 150th occasion, we have to think about what the next 50, 100, and 150 years will look like. And so I wish you the best of luck and all the blessings in that endeavor. And anything I can do from the faculty perspective, because I'm, teaching the next generation of alum.
I'm really honored to meet you formally because I was a trustee visiting your class on redlining. You hosted a class a couple years back. I was in the room, and I had appreciated your the way in which that systemically affected Black parents, fathers, the family unit, and I took away a lot from that class. If you ever need visitors for your class, I'll sit and listen.
Speak, contribute, converse with the students. Yes, please.
That'd be great.
Would love to have you. Well, Michelle, thank you for taking some time to share your history at St. Peter's with us. We look forward to connecting in the future. Thank you so much.
Most definitely. This was awesome. And I just pray for a successful event and outcome. When is the expected completion of the Oral History Project?
In the next 2 weeks, we will have an event. I believe it's the second week of April. we'll be sending out invitations soon.
Okay.
It was supposed to be early on, but then we had to push it back a little bit. But we'll make sure that you're on the invitation list for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, take good care now. Talk with you soon.